Welcome to another episode of History Now the Future, the show where we take a sharp look at some of the most pressing issues of today using history as our guide and the future as our destination. My name is Corey Bradford, and today on our interview episode, we have someone that we interviewed before. Actually, he was one of the first people we interviewed for this podcast, but I brought him back here today to talk about these recent rumors that have been spreading about Haitian immigrants in Ohio. These rumors were first spoken, were initially sparked to the mainstream by comments made by presidential candidate Donald Trump during last week's debate, but they actually come from before that. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the origins. And our guest today actually has a very large history with Haiti, spent a lot of time there, and was actually there on the ground for that horrific earthquake that occurred back in 2010. Journalist and author of the book The Big Truck That Went By, which I believe also focuses on Haiti. Jonathan M. Katz, thank you for joining us again. I really appreciate that.
Great to be back.
So first things first, let's just start off with what's going on right now. When you first heard the comments that was being made by Trump at the debate regarding the Haitian immigrants in Ohio, and I'm sure you were also aware that these rumors were being spread by his vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, even before that. When you first heard these comments and this sort of shift, because I mean, normally they've been focusing mainly on Mexican immigrants and immigrants from South America, and now this shift to this hysteria regarding Haitian immigrants. Given your background with that country, when you first heard these comments, what was your initial reaction?
I wasn't shocked, but I was floored. I don't know. I was just like, I came into the debate. Like, my big question coming into that debate is he going to talk about this? Like, is he going to say it, and what is he going to say about it? Because I was very aware that it was a big thing. It was really kicking off online, in both far right and MAGA circles, which are often just the same circle. And JD Vance, his running mate, had done a couple of tweets about it. I actually had already done an interview with a community leader in the Springfield Haitian community that I was editing at that moment, and I was about to, put out in my newsletter, The Racket, the next day. And so, one of my big questions, really my big question going into the debate, is like, is Donald Trump going to accuse Haitians of eating people's pets? I was like, maybe he'll just like allude to it. But no, he just said it. He just like came right out and said it. I don't think he actually said the word Haitians in
He
that
didn't.
moment.
Yeah.
He did or did?
He didn't. He didn't. As far as I remember, I don't remember him actually mentioning Haitians, but he definitely mentioned Springfield and was
Yeah.
alluding to that
Yeah. I
situation.
mean, it was anybody who'd been paying attention knew what he was talking about. And
Yeah.
so that, and everybody just kind of filled in the blanks after that. So yeah, I was like, I can't believe he did it. I can't believe he did it. I was like, and at that moment in the debate, Kamala Harris had done like a really good job of baiting him at that moment. Not to say that thing specifically, right? But she just masterfully tweaked him about the crowd sizes at his
Yeah.
rallies and said that, like, they're really boring and that people are leaving. And he just took that bait hook, line, and sinker. And he was very like shaken. And I had been thinking at that, coming into that moment, like, oh, he's mad. Like, he might he might say the N-word, like a hard R. I was like, I don't know where this is going, but like he's clearly unhinged. Like,
Yeah.
he's about to say something ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then he said that. And and it's similar, because one of the things that the Haitian diaspora does for Trump and the far right in general, is they combine anti-immigrant hysteria with anti-black racism. So it's a buy one get one free for Nazis.
Yeah, the weird thing about that, something I've told people because I've gotten a lot of people in my circle, not really in my circle, but people online who say things like, "Well, Trump says a lot of not so nice things about immigrants from south of the border, but he's not really racist against black people." I get a lot of people telling me that, And then I'm like, no, there's a history there. If you look at, the fact that he wouldn't rent his apartments to them back in the day, the Central Park Five comments. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a history there of animosity shown towards African Americans. It's just when he got into the entertainment industry, he did do some work with a lot of African Americans, and so there was
Yeah.
sort of that cloak there. And one thing that I always tell people is that it really doesn't even matter if he had said that many, racist comments against African Americans. It's like kind of like what you just said about the buy one get one free. I've always said to people when it comes to Trump's racism, it's kind of like a cable package when it comes to the
Yeah.
base that he's cultivated. It's like even if he's not saying that many things that are specifically racist about African Americans, the base he's speaking to by cultivating that base around hysteria and racism against just immigrants in general, he's buying a cable package that includes racism against African
Yeah.
Americans,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the analogy that I've always used there. His base is going to be racist towards them, regardless of if that's what he's really, aiming towards.
One of the things that really defines MAGA is just bigotry, but
In
it's not
general.
necessarily specific bigotries.
Yeah.
And there's different bigotries in different communities, all of which sort of find a home in MAGA.
Yeah.
Even class bigotry in areas that are themselves poor or
Yeah.
themselves non-white, like communities of color. Like if you are a person of Mexican descent, for instance,
Mhm.
in the Rio Grande Valley, and but you have a little bit of social privilege, or compared to the people around you, and you're a U.S. citizen, and you don't like people whose immigration status is more in question, or whatever. They're lower class than you. That whatever it is that you don't like about them, like there's a home for you in MAGA.
Yeah.
You know, and some Orthodox Jews who, like, there are other people in MAGA, like, are just flush with anti-Semitism,
Yeah.
but like there's some people who, like, if their thing is like, we don't like people from outside our community, like
Mhm.
there's a home for you in MAGA. And Trump is really in many ways an ideal vehicle for that, in large part because he comes from, I mean, look, he comes from New York.
Yeah.
He comes from Queens,
Yeah.
like wealthy Queens,
Yeah.
and he comes from a background in which I don't know exactly how to explain it, but when Americans think about racism, like, we tend to think about things in terms of, like old school, like Jim Crow segregationism. And
Mhm.
even there, like, some of the hardcore segregationists, like, had cutouts for, like, black people they liked or whatever, right? But like the New York kind of racism, like, it's it's different. It's built differently, and it has a lot to do with class. It has a lot to do with, like, well, these people are okay, but these people I don't like. It's you know there's bigotries based on class. It's like,
Mhm.
well, this, like, I'm okay with, like, Chinese people in Queens, but not in Brooklyn. It's like there's like a thing that people can do. And so for Trump, going back to the 80s, where, like, his
Mhm.
entire, just like, frontal cortex was formed, um uh he has had it in for poor black people,
Mhm.
as well as Haitians, specifically Haitians, because he came up in New York in the 80s. There was a large Haitian immigrant community, people who were fleeing, especially in the early 80s, the Duvalier dictatorship. Baby Doc Duvalier was still the dictator of Haiti at the time. And there was all kinds of very, very specific racism directed toward Haitians that came out of, like, broader anti-black racism, and other kinds of bigotry. But it's also very specific. It's like one thing that you can tell is just, like, very deep. It's just like an immediate tell that is just, like, really, really deep in Trump's mind about Haitians is, he'll bring up AIDS, and that is an old. It's not even a dog whistle. It's a foghorn from the 80s, because a lot of people don't know this. And it's good that people don't know this, because it means that it's fallen out of the culture somewhat. But just to explicate, I have to sort of bring it up. Haitians in the 80s were blamed by a lot of Americans for causing the AIDS epidemic.
Hmm.
There was no evidence for this. It has its roots in, there was a very, very notoriously bad piece of medical advice given by the CDC in 1982, in which they identified, like, AIDS is a brand new disease. They're just figuring out what it is. And they identify four main groups of carriers for people to watch out for. And they're known as the four H's. These were hemophiliacs, homosexuals, that's the H, that's the word they use for H, um, heroin users, and Haitians.
Wow.
And you could do like a whole episode here on like why this happened and how they got this wrong. A lot of it had to do with the fact that Haitians coming to Florida and New York at the time were, especially into Florida, because a lot of people were arriving on boats. They were poor. They didn't have like legal protections. So effectively, they didn't have, HIPAA or its 1980s equivalents. So doctors treating them could just openly report like this Haitian immigrant has this new disease, whereas other people, like, they were a little bit more restricted from
I
reporting
see.
that. So that was part of the reason why there was an over reporting.
Mhm.
There also was a significant AIDS outbreak in Haiti at the time, which was ultimately brought under control very successfully by the interventions of Dr. Paul Farmer and others. Um, but and a lot of that had to do with Haiti was a tourist mecca. Like,
Mm.
there was a lot of American sex tourism. So American men would go to Haiti and have sex with Haitian men. There's a whole bunch of things, and really, like, in the winter of like 1982, 1983, the Haitian tourism industry just died overnight because of these rumors, because Americans became convinced that, like, oh, Haiti equals AIDS. If I go to Haiti, I'll get AIDS. And again, for younger people, I don't think a lot of people realize or remember how terrifying AIDS was at the time. There was
Yeah.
no cure. It was a death sentence. Like, if this is how people looked at it. If you got it, you were dead, and it was going to be a horrible death, and it was going to be quick. And there was a lot of, because it was sexually transmitted, among other things, and because intravenous drug users were another group that had it, and there was obviously a huge outbreak in the gay community. There was all this moral freight, so it was like, it was a horrible thing, but also the people who had it maybe deserved it. So if you got it, then people would look at you and they would shun you and be like, you deserve it. And Donald Trump is in the 80s. He is he's a playboy, right? That's his reputation. And he's a playboy, and he's a germaphobe. And he's like notorious. Like, people who know Donald Trump know this about him. Like, he's a notorious germaphobe. And he has described um his, like, sexual escapades and brushes with and, like, threats of sexually transmitted infections with, he's called it my Vietnam, right? He said this,
Oh God.
which is, like, triply ironic, because, like, he
Yeah.
kept dodging the draft for Vietnam, right? Okay, so he was like, I didn't go to Vietnam, but, like, I had sex in New York in the 80s, and that was just as
That
dangerous.
was
This
his
is how
version
this
of
is
it.
how his mind works. And at the same time, you've got this Haitian immigrant community, specifically in Brooklyn, who are being blamed by mainstream media and, even, officials and others, for this disease, which everybody, especially him, is terrified of. Right? You combine that with his existing anti-black racism. You had alluded to, like, his refusal to rent apartments to black people. He was sued by Nixon's like the Nixon administration. Richard Nixon was like, I think you might be racist. Like, that's that's a pretty good sign, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
His dad was, arrested at a KKK rally, and, right, the whole thing, right? So all of these things are kind of like combining together in his mind, and it is very, very clear. It is very, very clear that this, from the beginning of his life, of his conscious life as an adult, informs his understanding of Haitians, who Haitians are, and the specific threat that Haitians pose to his own personal, like, health, And you can also tell in the ways that he talks about immigrants and America, like he thinks of it in corporeal terms, right? One of the notorious things that he said earlier this year is that immigrants are poisoning the blood of the country,
Hmm.
right? And like it is not hard to imagine the ways in which all of these things combine for him. And when you, and again, at the same time that he's doing this, he's in the 80s, where he's thinking these things about Haitians, he's writing his editorials about, or his advertorials, because he's paying for them, about how the Central Park 5 should be executed, which he still thinks. It's like he still very clearly thinks this. Um and so all of these things, it's like black people, crime, disease, immigrants, they don't speak English, like all of these things like very much seem to combine for him. And he has specifically had it in for Haitians. And the last thing that I'll say about like why now is that there's this confluence between Donald Trump's like personal anti-Haitian animus, um a general, and we can talk more about this in a minute, a historical American anti-Haitian animus going
Hmm.
back to the early 19th century,
Hmm.
the late 18th century, and the fact that there has been a real demographic shift in who the immigrants coming to the United States are. Because as it happens, in over the last 5-6 years, the proportion of immigrants coming to the United States from Central America, the Northern Triangle of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, has gone down, and the proportion that comes from Haiti, Venezuela, Cuba, a couple of other places, has gone up. And
Hmm.
so there actually are proportionally more Haitian immigrants as a proportion of the total immigrant population that's coming, compared to even when he was running for president in 2016. Although he was also saying anti-Haitian stuff back then too.
I knew bits and pieces that I did not know the relationship between Haitian immigrants and the AIDS crisis in the 1980s. And you are right about the fact that so many people. I mean, my generation. I'm in my early 30s. We were kind of at the tail end of that epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
I remember in the early 2000s, it was still very scary back then, and there were medicines and things coming out, and you had Magic Johnson walking around healthy, and
Yeah,
it was like, well, I don't know why that guy is somehow able to, especially since he
right.
got it in the early 90s, is somehow able to evade the worser aspects of this, or the worst aspects of this. Um, but yeah, it was still kind of scary back then. But now there is a lot more medication for it, and you are right. Like Gen Z and that generation really doesn't understand just how severe that was. You go back, you watch just TV shows from the 80s, and the way they talk about it, it was an absolute death sentence. And
Yeah,
it was a very, very scary thing, I think. And like you said, because of all those different groups, whether it would be, gay and lesbian individuals, drug users, intravenous drug users, and things like that, immigrants, all these different groups. It did make it a very taboo thing to have,
yeah,
which made it more reluctant, I think, for the government or medical officials to really address it as the outbreak and the epidemic that it was.
yeah. and
Um,
and and there
mhm,
was in, I forget the exact year, I think it was in the early 90s.
mhm,
There was a major protest in New York by the Haitian community. There's a march across the Brooklyn Bridge,
hmm,
against the stigma of Haitians and AIDS. There was a major migrant Haitian immigrant crisis in the early 90s. This was a
mhm,
big issue in the 1992 presidential election between Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush, and Ross Perot. Um, because so there had been a this is, I think, sort of getting into maybe a larger portion of this conversation, but
mhm,
because of U.S. policy, right? So in
mhm,
in 1991, um, the president of Haiti. So Haiti has had a dictatorship since 1957 to 1986, and then there's a succession of basically military governments. There's an attempt at a democratic election in 1987, which ends in horrific massacres. Like voters are machine gunned at the polls, so the election doesn't happen. And the United States had backed the dictators. They sort of pulled their support from Baby Doc at the end as it became clear that his tenure was untenable. This is Ronald Reagan as president at the time,
Hmm.
but then they kind of shift their support to the Haitian right, what's sometimes known as Duvalierism without Duvalier, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
People sometimes actually talk about today about Trumpism without Trump, and I think that there's a very clear echo in the thinking there, right?
Hmm.
And finally, in 1990, there's a Democratic election, and a pro-poor former Catholic priest, who is in favor of redistribution of wealth from Haiti's tiny, tiny elite to the poor masses, and had been a very devoted and very and brave and intrepid anti-Duvalier activist named Jean-Bertrand Aristide. He is elected president, and it's an overwhelming victory. And he's really the first. He's there's a few complications in making this as a broad statement, but he's certainly the first president in Haiti to be elected democratically in a nationwide plebiscite, okay, in a nationwide election, and it's an overwhelming victory. He's president for 9 months. He's overthrown by the army, and there are very clear ties between the people who overthrow him and elements of the U.S. government. Okay, I mean, a number of the people who overthrow Aristide in 1991 had been on the CIA's payroll
Hmm.
shortly before. A guy named Toto Constant. There's a lot of data behind this. It's not clear whether George H.W. Bush, who's president at the time, like authorizes this coup, but he certainly doesn't mind it
Hmm.
because Aristide he considers Aristide a leftist, maybe like a potential communist. Haiti
Hmm.
is right next to Cuba, right? So
Hmm.
they're like, you know what, get rid of this guy. We're okay with this. And the junta of Raul Cedras, who's the head of the junta, the army chief of staff who overthrows Aristide, goes on basically like a reign of terror in Haiti. Because when Duvalier was overthrown, there was this process called the déchoucage, the uprooting, where people like went through and punished members of the former regime. He had the secret police that were known as the Tonton Macoute. They would kill Macoute. They destroyed cultural markers or monuments to the Duvaliers, things like this, and kind of as revenge for that, as well as a way of just trying to destroy Aristide's base of support. Aristide's in exile at this point. The junta goes around and just murders people horrifically. So there's a huge wave of people who take to boats and try to get out of Haiti to come
Yeah.
to the United States. And George H.W. Bush uh, and the Coast Guard uh, interdict a lot of these guys and try to send them back to Haiti. But they can't send them back to Haiti. It's a little difficult. Also, like there's very clear reasons not to send them back to a
Yeah.
place that they're very clearly going to be killed. So they are rounded up and they are put in Cuba at the U.S. Naval Station at Guantanamo Bay. And actually, the prison camp that ends up being the prison camp at Gitmo in the years after 9/11 and still today is built at that time to house Haitian
Wow.
refugees who are trying to come to the United States. And this becomes, as I said, a big issue in the 1992 election. And Bill Clinton is criticizing George H.W. Bush for inhumanity, and these people are just trying to flee for their lives, and you're taking them and you're sending them back. One of the pieces of this, and this is the reason I brought it up at this moment in the conversation, is that a lot of the Haitians are eventually let go from Gitmo.
Hmm.
Some are returned to Haiti. I don't know if any are directly allowed to come back to the United States, although certainly some of them end up in the United States. And this is, again, we're talking, it's the 90s, and like
Hmm.
so this is Donald Trump's like imagination is information. But
Hmm.
one of the most notorious pieces of this is that uh, HIV positive Haitian refugees are continued to be housed at Gitmo, and it kind of becomes like a little concentration camp
Hmm.
for HIV positive Haitians in Cuba. right? Like under these U.S. auspices. And this again, this becomes an enormous. This is a huge national scandal. Lots of different opinions about it. Talk shows are dominated by it, and all of this is like sinking into Donald Trump's mind. And again, the only way you can understand that is if you understand like sort of the idea that first of all, AIDS is like this horrific blood poisoning that will just get you in your sleep, and you won't know it hit you, and it'll destroy the country. It's eventually going to wipe out all life on Earth. Like this is how people are thinking, right?
Yeah.
In some ways, um, and also the idea that Haiti specifically is a place of contagion,
Hmm.
which is again, it's a thought that goes back to the Haitian Revolution. And so all of that is subsumed in Donald Trump's mind. Still to this day, it's very, very clear if you listen to the way if you listen to things he says and the way he says them. And like you go back to that era, like SNL is making jokes about Haitians having AIDS. Like
Wow.
it was just there's a horrific uh, sketch in particular. It was a parody of a Gap ad, and it was called Bad Ideas Jeans. And Kevin Nealon, actually, I think it is, like makes a joke about AIDS in Haiti, and it's really
Wow.
cringeworthy. But like people thought this was hilarious at the time in the States.
Wow. Well, now that I wasn't aware of that sketch.
Yeah.
I had just read an entire. I was reading a book about the George H.W. Bush presidency, and I had
Mhm.
just read about that entire episode
Yeah.
regarding Haiti. So I was aware of that. So let's backtrack a little bit because obviously, as our audience can see, you have an incredibly astute knowledge of Haiti.
Mm.
You spent a large amount of time in Haiti even prior to the Haitian earthquake of 2010, and you were there
Yeah.
on the ground when that earthquake occurred. So one of the
Right.
questions that I had for you was, why were you in Haiti prior to that earthquake? How long had you been there, and what were you doing there?
I was the Associated Press correspondent, bureau chief, and I'd been there for about 2.5 years before the earthquake. So I ended
Okay.
up living in Haiti for about 3.5 years in all. But then I've continued going back, and I've spent long periods of time there since. I was there for work. I was a journalist. I uh, through a series of life and job related events ended up as the correspondent in Santo Domingo, and then the correspondent in Port-au-Prince had to leave, and I got the call to go over, and this was 3 years after. So Aristide
Hmm.
is overthrown in 91. He comes back in 94. Bill Clinton orders a U.S. invasion to overthrow the junta and put Aristide back in power. But there's a bunch of catches there. And Aristide then is reelected in 2000. There's another president in between, who's like Aristide's kind of surrogate at that moment.
Hmm.
A guy named Rene Preval, who was actually again the president during the earthquake. And then Aristide is elected again in 2000, and then overthrown again in 2004
Hmm.
in yet another coup with very clear ties to elements of the Republican Party in particular, and the U.S. government in general.
Hmm.
And that's under George W. Bush, so the son of the guy who was in power when he was overthrown the first time. And that was in 2004. So in this is 2007 now. So I get the call
Hmm.
to go to Haiti. So it's still a pretty big story. And I go, and I didn't have any particular ties to Haiti at
Hmm.
that point. I didn't have any particularly deep knowledge of Haiti, but it seemed like a really interesting story, and so I moved into Port-au-Prince, and I was actually supposed to leave in early 2010. I had already accepted a transfer to Afghanistan,
Hmm.
but then the earthquake hit, and I stayed.
What was your overall impression of Haiti prior to the earthquake?
It is a complicated place, a wonderful place in a lot of ways. Um, it's a very difficult place. It's a very, very difficult place to live for anybody, especially if you're a poor Haitian, which is the vast majority of the Haitian population. It is. There's a lot of different things to say about it. It's a wonderful country, with a really very proud history, which Haitians are acutely aware of it, or at least they're aware of the revolution,
Yeah.
which we could talk about. But it's the first, it's the only country in the modern world to be founded in a successful revolution by enslaved people who
Yeah.
overthrew slavery and colonialism and declared themselves independent.
Hmm.
First black republic in the world and the second independent republic in the Western Hemisphere.
Hmm.
So that's really cool. That's a really cool thing. You know, there's this good food. The music is incredible. The dancing is incredible. And you know, but it's also a problem. It's also a place with a lot of problems, and uh, a lot of time is spent in Haiti, especially among foreigners, but also among Haitians, like trying to like figure out like what the root of Haiti's problems are.
Hmm.
And you know, depending on one's politics or depending on like how well read one is, you can come to different conclusions about that. But the result is that Haiti in this epoch, like the time that I was living there and now,
Hmm.
is in a lot of ways like a libertarian paradise. Like there's effectively no government,
Oh, wow.
and I use paradise ironically because it's like this is what happens when you have no government, when you
Yeah.
have effectively no public works, when everybody has to effectively fend for themselves. There's a
Mm.
lot of culturally Haitians are extremely, you might say, you know, pro-social. They really, especially within their neighborhood, their quartier, you know, their village, their laku, which is like a small, like, you know, neighborhood, like a group of houses. um they very much like band together and help one another,
Mhm.
because they have to,
Yeah.
in a way that like you don't necessarily see in the States. Right, in the
Yeah.
States you can live in a neighborhood and like not know your neighbors.
Yeah.
That's generally not possible in Haiti.
Mm.
But um the other piece of that is that if your house catches fire, you got to put it out yourself,
Mm.
because there isn't going to be a fire department coming. If there's a pothole in the road, and there will be because there's a lot of them, like you have to fill it yourself, or it doesn't get filled.
Mm.
And so like, you know, sometimes you'll see, if you go to Haiti, you'll see, you know, people standing next to potholes, filling them in with like a bag of cement, and they'll you know, wave down passing cars to get cars to sort of like, you know, reimburse them for the cement, that they're, and maybe a little bit of their labor that they're doing.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's a very hard place. It's a very hard place because the all of the difficulties that come from living in extreme poverty, are there and are exacerbated. And it was the last thing that I will say is that in the time that I lived there, I wouldn't describe it on the whole as being a particularly violent place.
Mhm.
In fact, when I first moved to Haiti, it was very safe. I mean, um, you know, my predecessor at the AP, like you know, he wouldn't lock the door at the AP house. I did because I grew up with parents from New York, so I didn't try to do that anyway. But uh, and you know, but there were waves of violence. There were waves of kidnapping,
Mhm.
which I lived through, um, and and there were street gangs. There was street violence, and Haiti was often used as a drug transshipment point for cartels from Colombia. Although ultimately the Dominican Republic ended up becoming a much bigger transshipment point, and then all of the Caribbean ended up getting bypassed for the Mexico route.
Mhm.
But that was a thing that was happening there. But what has happened in the last, what is 2024 now, what's happened in the last 3 years in particular, is and there were things were starting in this direction before this, but there was assassination of the president, Jovenel Moise, in 2021, who was the first Haitian president to be assassinated since 1915. And what happened in 1915 when that president was assassinated was that was the pretext for the U.S. invasion and occupation of Haiti, which lasted for 19 years. But in 2021, Jovenel Moise was assassinated, and in the 5 years that he had been president, he hadn't held a single election for any office anywhere in the country, which meant
Wow.
that all the offices in Haiti, from the parliament to the mayor level, were vacant or had been sort of temporarily filled by Moise's appointees. So the government, which had just been getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, often as a direct result of American policy, because American policy, like especially going back to the Duvalier era, was to sort of try to shrink the power of the dictatorship by going around it, through its own NGOs and through its own private organizations. But it had reached sort of a almost a nadir. It had become smaller than it had ever been at the moment that Moise was assassinated, and there was effectively no government. And so there was kind of no effective government before that, and there's really no government now. And so what happened in that power vacuum was some street gangs, some paramilitary groups kind of metastasized and started competing for power with one another. And then Port-au-Prince became an extremely violent place to be, the capital of Haiti, as well as some of the other cities. And all of that, and the earthquake, and the hurricanes, and the destruction of Haiti's agricultural sector, again, as a result of like US neoliberal policy. Um, all of those things, and climate change, all of those things are reasons why anybody who can leave Haiti is. They're trying to get out. And it's not because they don't like Haiti. They love Haiti. And the vast majority of Haitians that you will talk to will tell you that, their dream is to go back to Haiti, with like, to make money somewhere else and then go back to Haiti, and live out their lives, because they love it. They really, really have a very, very deep attachment to their country. But nonetheless, life there has become so untenable, that anybody who can get out is getting out, and um, a lot of people are ending up in the United States, ironically, because the United States is responsible for so many of the problems that happen
Yeah, so let's move on to that.
there.
The fact that so many of these Haitian immigrants are ending up in the United States, and like you
Yeah.
pointed out in the video that you posted on TikTok, a lot of them are here legally.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. Springfield, Ohio. You've already given this story a little bit on that TikTok video, but for people who haven't seen it, how did this particular town in Ohio come to be a place where so many Haitian immigrants wanted to go?
Yeah. So essentially, my understanding is, so Springfield, Ohio was an industrial center. And there were two major employers in town. One was like a magazine factory that closed in 1957, but then the big employer that remained until the early 1980s was International Harvester, which was the big farm equipment producer. And in the over the course of, like, from the 1960s to the 1980s, International Harvester, basically because of corporate greed, ends up making a series of like really bad corporate decisions. They're trying to squeeze their workers, and they're trying to squeeze their customers, who are predominantly farmers,
Mhm.
to sort of maximize profits for themselves. And eventually they're burning the candle at both ends, and it fails. And there have been big layoffs, and then International Harvester goes out of business. There's a successor corporation that sort of takes on the name, and I think actually operates a kind of a skeleton operation still in Springfield. But Springfield's heyday as like an International Harvester company town is over,
Yeah.
and the population of Springfield declines. The population of Springfield is higher in 1960 than it was in the 2020 census, despite the
Wow.
fact that the U.S. population has almost doubled in that time as a
Mhm.
country, right? And like a lot of other towns, but I think in some ways more successful. Springfield, by the way, is kind of on the outskirts of Dayton. It's
Mhm.
between Dayton and Columbus, but it's near Dayton. They're basically Chamber of Commerce. Chamber of Commerce gives itself like a cute new name, like Welcome Springfield or something like that. And they have some. They don't call themselves Chamber of Commerce anymore, but it's a Chamber of Commerce. Chamber of Commerce and like the mayor of Springfield, they launch a campaign to try to attract new industries to the town, and it works. Like they're successful. Japanese auto parts manufacturer, a microchip producer comes in. There's a Dole Foods plant that starts hiring more. There's some other existing um, businesses in town that like get money and expand and open new jobs. And there's kind of a call for jobs. And for whatever reason, people in Southwest Ohio don't want these jobs, or they don't want enough of the jobs to fill them. And at some point, I don't know who it was, but at some point, somebody who's from Haiti comes to town and gets one of these jobs, and they tell their brother, and the brother tells the cousin, and the cousin tells his ex-wife. But like it's like, like word gets around.
Hmm.
Um, this is not particular to Haitians, although Haitians do it very well. There's a Haitian thing called telejol. Jol means mouth. And so like they talk about you know, television stations are called like, Teleguinen, Telecaib. So telejol is the mouth channel, right? So the mouth channel gets activated and people show up. This is not unique.
No.
This happens, and isn't even just like a recent phenomenon. First of all, this is how immigrants always operate, right? This is how
Hmm.
immigrant
Hmm.
communities operate. This is how people operate. People
Hmm.
are like, you don't generally like you move somewhere maybe for a job,
Yeah.
but like you move, like you hear like, oh, there's a good place to live and there's good schools and housing's cheaper, like whatever it is, whatever your menu of things that you want in a town, like you
Hmm.
hear it from a guy who you trust, who heard it from somebody else, and then you
Yeah.
go, right? And just to like use another example, I used to live in North Carolina,
Hmm.
and Mount Olive, North Carolina, home of Mount Olive pickles. There's a large butterball frozen turkey processing plant,
Hmm.
and at some point, someone from Haiti got a job, and the same process happened. And there's like, it's not huge, but like
Hmm.
there's like a significant Haitian pop, or at least there was, whenever this was 10, 20 years ago, there's a significant population in Mount Olive, North Carolina, of Haitians. It's a thing that happens. And so this is not just Springfield, but Springfield is a place where it happened. And the thing is that, I mean, there's a lot of different like tendrils to pull out of here. But one thing that I learned when I was doing research on Springfield is that Springfield has a, I don't want to say unique, but maybe unique for its area history of like racism. Um, it was a stronghold of the KKK in the second Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. There was a big Klan rally there in 1994. There was a series of what are somewhat euphemistically called race riots, aka like white mobs attacking black residents in the early 1900s. And so I don't know the extent to which like, the fact that there were maybe just some like old school racists in town like put this place on the map of like, the far right and white power neo-Nazi groups in the States in a way that didn't happen for other towns. I don't know, but that's one hypothesis that I have. But whatever it was, and then the big thing that launched it onto the national stage was the fact that JD Vance, senator from Ohio, who has really embraced anti-immigrant agitprop as sort of like his way into the Republican Party and Republican politics.
Hmm.
Um, Despite the fact that he apparently was like writing papers in law school about how horrible it is to be anti-immigrant. And then did you read this recently? He got like a Yale professor to like take like in 2016 he like encouraged this professor to like take this blog post down so it wouldn't trouble him as he continued his rise through the GOP.
Wow.
And of course, like the irony, except it maybe not be an irony, is that his wife is an immigrant,
Yeah.
right, from India.
Yeah. Yeah.
But clearly in his mind, like the right kind of immigrant. Like
Hmm.
this goes back to the thing we were talking about earlier. It's like racism and bigotry is like often very identifiable. It's not always entirely straightforward, but like there's logics that you can follow through.
Hmm.
And like I think it's very clear that he's like, she's highborn. She comes
Hmm.
from like a prominent caste in India. Like she's one of the good ones. She's not
Basically.
poor
Yeah.
and whatever black. She's not whatever his conception is.
Hmm.
That she has like these inborn advantages that in his mind Haitians don't. But so this kind of anti-immigrant sentiment. I mean, this is as old a story as there is in the world, right? Industry, agriculture, whatever it is, needs laborers. Locals aren't willing to do the work for whatever reason, doesn't pay well, the bad conditions, there's not enough prestige involved in it, whatever it is.
Hmm.
So immigrants come and do it. They float the local economy. They're an enormous boon to the community, but some of the people who are already in the community start resenting them. They
Yeah.
resent them because they're different. They resent them because they're changing, the character of the place that they live in these people's minds, whatever it is. Also, like efforts are made, often direct efforts by capital, by business owners, by politicians to sort of like set like the poorer working, quote unquote native population, the people who were born there against the immigrants.
Yeah.
Also, this is a very old story in the U.S. South, right? Like
Yeah.
setting poor whites against the enslaved Africans. Like this is as old as America, and it's not unique to America either. This happens
Yeah.
all over the world. And so this this miasma, comes to the attention of J.D. Vance through his very clear access to far right circles, right?
Yeah.
He's a big fan of just like open fascist writers like Curtis Yarvin, and he's part of the Peter Thiel network, which
Yeah.
also includes Blake Masters, and it's like it is not hard to imagine how this comes to his attention,
Yeah.
and then he starts promoting these this hate against the Haitian community in Springfield
Hmm.
before he becomes Trump's running mate.
Hmm.
He's bringing it up in hearings. He gives a speech about it. He talks about it at the National Conservatism Conference,
Hmm.
which is like a far right, like very like in many cases quasi and sometimes outright fascist gathering in the Washington area.
Hmm.
And he keeps talking about Springfield, talking about Springfield, talking about Springfield. Then he joins the ticket,
Hmm.
and things kind of go from there. And I think you can sort of see how this bubbled up.
Where did the specific rumor about Haitians eating people's pets in Ohio? Because as we've pointed out, the Springfield police has said that there is no specific evidence or credible reports, official reports with their department saying that these Haitians were stealing pets or eating pets or anything like that. Yet that was what Donald Trump said during the debate. Uh, and so, for some of our listeners who aren't aware, where did that come from? I mean, is that just these sort of stereotypes that people conjure up about Haiti, or is it something more specific?
Well, I mean, the answer is kind of all of the above,
Hmm.
but there is a specific way that it came in. But I will note before talking about this that like that is a very old trope about immigrants in general.
Yeah.
Um, people sort of uh, they look at first of all like immigrants eating patterns, and sometimes they're legitimately different, and sometimes like they have like a different shape of noodle than like the local people, and then sometimes it's just made up, right? And so like you see going back to the just through American history, 19th century, just like rumors about Chinese immigrants eating weird animals, and in England, like the Guardian was reporting, or not the Guardian, but the Guardian reported on this, but it was the Sun, which is like one of Murdoch's like right-wing tabloids, like had this like rash of stories like 20 years ago about like Eastern European refugees like stealing the Queen's swans and eating them, which wasn't true,
Hmm.
because all swans in England belong to the Queen or something like this. Anyway, or the Queen or the royal family has the right to claim the swans, and thus they are the swans. Whatever. I don't know. That's for a different thing. But anyway, so like so that's an old school thing, and the reason why it's very effective is because like food is so personal. right? And
Yes.
food ways are so like deeply cultural.
Yep.
And like talking about like eating specific animals, and I just want to really highlight here, like there is no I lived in Haiti for 3.5 years. I've been traveling there for a decade. I have never seen anyone eat a cat, cook a cat or a dog. I've never seen that. I heard jokes about that, but I don't think that it happens.
Hmm.
And it's possible it happens because like it happens maybe everywhere. I have
Hmm.
actually been in China, in
Hmm.
rural southern China. I was at a dinner 20 years ago where dog was served. I didn't eat it for the same reason I don't eat pork. But but so like this is a thing, and like there's actually a great book about it. And I'm blanking on the exact title, but I think it's called like Why We Love Dogs, Wear Cows, and Eat Pigs. I think that's what it's called. It came out in like 2009 by a social psychologist. Like like there's something about like which specific animals that we eat. I eat meat, and I think everybody who eats meat knows that like at some level, like it isn't really defensible that we eat some animals and not
And not
others,
others. Yeah. Yeah.
because it doesn't really make like there's arguments that you can, but like there's it's really a cultural,
Yeah.
it's a cultural thing more than
More than
anything else.
anything. Yeah.
Um, and humans just have like an aversion to eating carnivores, maybe for like health reasons, I don't know, but like it's just so like the idea like that you like the idea that like fundamentally there would be nothing different about like eating a cat than eating a cow, like in terms of like the consciousness of the animal. But
Hmm.
we love cats, but some people love cows anyway. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's neither here nor there, because there was nothing behind this.
Yeah.
I just want to say, I should probably get back to that. So there was a Facebook post on like a private Facebook group called like Springfield Crime and Information or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And it was a post about how a woman, it was by a woman, but she was like, my neighbor's daughter's friend like lost her cat, and then a couple days later saw it being like hung up at a tree at a Haitian house, like a house of Haitians, something along those lines, right?
Wow.
And this was completely false.
Yeah.
And in fact, the woman who I'll just call her out by name. Her name is Erica Lee, just because this has been reported out. I'm not doxing her. This has been everywhere in mainstream media. Um, uh, she um, she was tracked down, and she was like, I had nothing behind. There was nothing. There was nothing behind this. And
Yeah.
they tracked down the neighbor who she heard the story from, and the neighbor was like, it wasn't my daughter. It was an acquaintance of a friend. That was the
Mm.
word that she used. And then the Wall Street Journal tracked somebody down, and I don't know if it's the same neighbor or not, or somebody who was responsible for another rumor. But
Mhm.
like the cat appeared again. The cat was like in the basement.
So the
It's
cat
like
that had
pro
been
tip.
supposedly eaten
Yes.
just appears, is back,
Yeah. Yeah.
just came back.
Because you know the thing about cats is sometimes they go away and
They
then they
leave
come back.
and they just come back. I had a cat when I was like in high school, and it just left, and we were like, "Well, that cat's gone." And then like 2 weeks later, literally 2 weeks later, just showed up on our doorstep, meowing very loudly, wanting food. We were like, "Where have you been? Like, what is this?" They just do that sometimes.
Not for nothing, the place where I lived, where I had that happen, I had a cat who kind of lived in our house sometimes,
Yeah,
but then would be gone for a couple weeks and then come back because
yeah.
she was clearly getting food from other houses. Was in Haiti.
Oh yeah. Wow.
We called her
Yeah,
Mimi, which is the Creole word for cat. And
yeah.
she like Mimi lived in like no one ate her. They were feeding her. So there was nothing behind this.
Yeah.
And there's so many different ways to debunk it. The city manager, of course, has been contacted. Springfield police have said like we have no reports about this. We have no credible reports
Yeah.
that this
Incredible.
is happening. There was
Mhm.
nothing behind it. There was nothing behind it except for the assumption that like these people are from somewhere else, so they must eat weird food.
Mhm.
And then what gets tied in here, right? Because it's not just about the things that they are supposedly eating, even though they're not, but this gets tied in with what is literally a blood libel.
Hmm.
And blood libel, for people who aren't familiar, is a term that comes from medieval Europe, medieval European anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, hatred of Jews. And the idea was, I'm Jewish, right? So the idea was that my people, my ancestors, would kidnap Haitian. This is false. I have to bracket it every like.
Yeah.
None of this happened. None of this is true. But like the idea was that the Jews would kidnap Haitian children. Christian children,
Hmm.
and drain their blood to use to make matzah to eat on Passover.
And that
It is
sounds
the
so ridiculously and
it's the dumbest.
cartoonishly made up.
Yes, it's the dumbest theory. It makes no sense. And if
Yeah.
you've ever like had matzah, like it doesn't taste like anything. You would notice if there was. Also, I don't even know why I have to defend against this, but just for to clarify, in Jewish dietary laws,
Mhm.
there's a very strict prohibition against eating any kind of blood, even from a
Yeah.
kosher animal.
Mm.
Okay, so like very observant Jews won't even eat like rare steak because like all the blood has to be like cooked out and salted
Yeah.
out within an
Yeah.
inch of its life. And you can't eat people because people aren't kosher animals anyway. Like even if like you could, right? So none of this makes sense. But
No.
on the basis of this blood libel, this was the basis for horrific anti-Jewish violence, mass murder, pogroms,
Mm.
for centuries. So this is
Wow.
people sometimes hear the word blood libel, but
Mhm.
or they use it, in loose ways. But what it literally means is basically like taking like an alien and a not from here or shouldn't be from here population in the minds of the people who are saying this,
Mhm.
taking something that is very precious to a person, their children, or in this case their pets, and using it for food, right? That's what blood libel is. So in Springfield we have this combination of kind of anti-immigrant hysteria, based on the demonization of foodways, and blood libel kind of merged into this one sort of perfect storm. And it's why it is so effective. It's why it's so effective that like you and I have to sit here like going really deep and citing sources and like interrupting ourselves like every 3 seconds to be like, but it isn't true, but it isn't true. Whereas like all somebody has to say is like, hey, these weirdos who just came into town, they're stealing pets and eating them. Like that just there's just something that's very, very deep in the human brain that just like it just ticks that on. It just resonates. And if you don't think about it too hard, if you don't think about it too hard, it kind of just sits there, and then it's like, well, but it feels true. And then like and then that's when real problems happen. So all of those things kind of came together. And JD Vance, like I said, had been, stirring up hate against the Haitian community in Springfield for months.
Yeah.
And he had all kinds of different, things that he was accusing them of, including, by the way, the old school, like bringing AIDS, like literally, like he has
Wow.
said that. Which there's no evidence. Again, there's no evidence of that. There's
Yeah.
no evidence of even like an increased prevalence of HIV in Clark County, Ohio. There's just no evidence of this. Even if it was true, then you wouldn't be. But like, it's not. It doesn't even matter. It's not true. Um, and Haiti's HIV rate is not that high anymore anyway. But it doesn't really matter. Um, the point is that he had tried lots of different ways of getting at this. And then the pet eating thing happened, and he ran with it because he just sort of understood instinctively, and Trump also understood instinctively how effective a slur it is, how effective a libel it is, because people love their pets, and if you can convince them that like if you can convince them that Fido and Kitty are in danger because of like these people, then all of the sort of higher cognition things about like, oh, but they're important for the economy, and they're helping revitalize industry. Then you just like all that gets drowned out because then you look at your cat and you're like, but I love my cat. and then that's what drives people to just do crazy things. The other thing I should say, um, just to be a completist, is that the moment, and I did an interview at my newsletter, The Racket, with Ville Dosanville, who's one of the leaders of the Haitian community in Springfield.
Hmm.
And he attests to this, and has also been pretty broadly reported elsewhere, that the moment when things really started to take a turn, and was in August of 2023, so last year. There was a horrific bus accident.
Hmm.
A driver driving a minivan missed a turn, or missed a curve, hit a school bus. School bus turned over,
Oh man.
and an 11-year-old boy was thrown from the window and died. His name was Aiden Clark, and the driver of that minivan was Haitian. Um, he he was also driving without a valid U.S. license. He had a license from Mexico, because he had been in Mexico. He had left Haiti in 2014, it seems. He was in Brazil, where a lot of Haitians went, but then xenophobia creeped up in Brazil, under Jair Bolsonaro, who was the kind of pro-Trump president of Brazil, and like not a not insubstantial number of people, he then crossed into the United States, a very, very dangerous journey. And he's spent time in Mexico, almost certainly under Donald Trump's Remain in Mexico program, where basically people were trying to get into the United States were forced to be in Mexico while their claims were being processed. Um, However it was, he ended up in the States. He was here legally, is here legally, I believe under either humanitarian parole or temporary protected status. I forget the one, but he is here legally. But he never bothered to get a Ohio driver's license. He had an Ohio state ID, which attests to his legal status, but he didn't have an Ohio driver's license. Anyway, the lack of a license is what bumps this up to a felony. He's now in prison, and will be there for a while. The maximum sentence, I think, is like 13 and a half years, um, that he was sentenced to. And that moment really catalyzed a lot of sort of these simmering, inchoate, um, resentments, that the U.S. born population in Springfield had against these Haitian born newcomers. And the Nazis, like literal neo-Nazi groups, got involved.
Wow.
They've marched in Springfield. They had done this even before Trump made his speech, but there's been more since. The Proud
Hmm.
Boys have come to Springfield since,
Hmm.
and then of course there's been this raft of bomb threats since
Yeah.
Trump's comments at the debate. But it was really, according to the people there, it was really that moment that really catalyzed it. But the last thing to add about that is that Aiden Clark's father, a guy named Nathan Clark,
Hmm.
has been very, very outspoken about this.
Yes, I have seen some of this.
And he has said, basically, take my son's name out of your mouth, like to,
Hmm.
to Donald Trump and JD Vance, as well as the rest of the right. Because JD Vance has said, like, they've murdered this kid, and he has said, like, he wasn't murdered, like it was an accident, like it was not. It's a horrific tragedy, but like it was not. He was not hunting this child, like
Yeah.
he didn't want to run into the school bus. It wasn't good for him either. And his father, to his, like the amount of self insight and just kind of empathy and big heartedness that you have to go through the unimaginable loss of a child, and still say, like, but this is an insult to my child's memory, to
Hmm.
use this tragedy as a reason to demonize this population in our city that belongs here, that should be here as much as everybody else. Is that's it really says something about Aiden Clark's parents, that's really important. And when he made those comments again after the debate, and Nazi groups online are publicly calling for the execution of the parents now, because they see them as traitors to the white race.
And it, whenever a tragedy like that happens, you want to blame someone. And
Yeah,
for him to have the just the insight to be able to say, well, this was an accident.
yeah,
Not to mention it could have happened to anyone from
yeah,
anyone. Like, I
yeah,
mean, car accidents, these types of things happen every day in this country. It's one thing if it was some type of intentional killing, but the fact that it was an accident and that Vance and Trump and people like that are taking an accident
yeah,
and saying, "Oh well, this immigrant without a
yeah,
license was driving." It's like that could have been anyone. That could have
yeah.
literally been any white, black, any person born in the U.S. could have done something like that, and you wouldn't be able to use their immigrant status to sort of justify some type of hatred against them when it comes to that sort
Yeah,
of thing.
I looked at the statistics. I mean, there are something on the order of like 150 people killed in accidents involving school buses every year. I think a lot
Wow,
of them are actually hit by the school bus.
wow.
Um, I mean, it's a decent safety record compared to like other forms of transportation, but like it does happen.
And two other things that I wanted to point out about what you just all the
Yeah,
comments you just made. One was that, when it comes to these rumors about Haitian immigrants, it's kind of like it reminds me of high school. Like if you didn't like someone in high school and someone told
yeah,
you a rumor about them, it was so much easier to believe that rumor because you already didn't like that person.
yeah,
And so
exactly.
when they spread these rumors about Haitian immigrants or any immigrants really, it does become this sort of thing. Well, I can believe they stole that pet because they're different. They're an other.
Right.
They're different from me. But the ironic thing too, though, is that Christy Nome, I think the governor of South Dakota,
Right.
was on the
Yeah,
short list for VP, and so Trump
yeah,
went from almost picking someone who just avidly bragged about shooting and killing a dog
yeah,
to picking someone who instead is, basically spreading rumors that these immigrants are taking and eating dogs. So it's like it's a pretty big shift from what he initially was going to pick as his VP,
yeah.
someone who is preying on Americans' love for dogs rather than the alternative there. I want to ask you, what do you like? Talk a little bit about the the possible outcomes here, because you have said before that what Vance is doing, what Trump is doing in spreading these rumors is more than just, oh, we're trying to win an election. That
Yeah.
this could lead to real violence against these immigrants. That this could lead to a type of social breakdown there that
Yeah.
could turn ugly for a lot of people involved. So, can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about what the outcomes that could occur here with this type of rhetoric regarding these immigrants?
I mean, what Trump and Vance want? First of all, they want power. They want to win the election. And then once they come to power, they want to carry out what Trump's like his only campaign promise is the largest mass deportation in U.S. history.
Yeah.
Um, and he says it's going to be violent. He says it's going to be a bloody story. It's going to, if he gets it, it'll involve National Guard and the U.S. military. And what happens in moments like that all over the world is when you have a mass deportation, this also then becomes kind of carte blanche for vigilantes to like sort of do
Yeah.
whatever it is that they wanted to do in the meantime anyway. And also like it ends up being like one of the reasons why mass deportations are a crime against humanity is because invariably um you other people get caught up in them.
Yeah.
This isn't to say that like somebody who is like actually an undocumented immigrant or who overstayed a visa or whatever like deserves to like whatever's gonna, but like in addition to that,
Mhm.
people should be aware that you know if this happens, there aren't going to be distinctions made
No.
between Haitians and other people who black people, other people who look Haitian, or Venezuelans and other people who look Latin, or just anybody who's just sort of like anybody who is in the town and the people who are just sort of like, I don't like you, you don't belong. And Trump and Vance are talking openly about denaturalizing people, about stripping US citizenship from people. Specifically, they're talking about like the children of undocumented immigrants,
Mhm.
who under the 14th Amendment are US citizens if they were born in the United States. But if they can do that, then they can do it from anybody.
Yeah.
And they've also talked about deporting pro-Palestinian protesters.
Yeah.
And if they were successful, they wouldn't stop there. They would just deport anybody who they didn't want to be in the United States for whatever reason, political enemies, whatever it is. Um, it seems very clear that that's like kind of the policy goal, if you can call it that they're trying to get out of all this. in terms of sort of the ideological goal, it is to, try to foster a kind of ideology in their followers and other people who the rhetoric reaches. This idea that foreigners are here, they're poisoning the blood of the country, they're eating our pets, they're bringing diseases, all of the arguments that you can imagine for why immigration is good, are invalid because of like this like deep threat to like, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to create or access an idea of America as an ethno state, effectively, like as a place where like like some people belong and some people don't,
Mm-hmm.
and they're the ones who get to decide who belongs and who doesn't. It is a there have been attempts to foster this idea of America throughout American history.
Mm-hmm.
They have always failed, um, but that doesn't mean that they will necessarily fail this time, and that's really what they're trying to do. So in the immediate moment, I mean, I think the threat is to like the Haitian community in Springfield.
Yeah.
That's that something could happen there, that like what happened in Charlottesville in 2017. Groups come, try to start trouble, or what happened in El Paso at
Yeah.
the Walmart, where a guy who bought Trump's rhetoric about the Democrats importing voters, decides to quote unquote take matters in his own hands, or at the top supermarket in Buffalo. I mean, there's
Yeah.
there are a lot of different ways that could happen, and I don't mean to minimize it by saying it's that's on a small scale, but just like on a hyper local scale, I think I would be concerned about that, or immigrant communities elsewhere,
Yeah.
Asian communities elsewhere, whatever. Um, but then at a larger level, that's what they're trying to do. What JD Vance wants to do, what Donald Trump wants to do, is they want to foster an understanding of America, that this is not a place that is built on an ideal. It's not a place that's built on precepts like all men are created equal, or that every and that anyone who is born in America is automatically a U.S. citizen, and that all U.S. citizens you know could and should participate fully in public life, including voting, including electing our leaders, including becoming leaders themselves.
Mm-hmm.
All of these are things that like have never happened fully, right, in
Yeah.
America, but like they are ideals that have been there,
Yeah.
and they want to get rid of all that. They want to get rid of that. That is what they want, and they are very specific. They are very clear that that's what they want, because when JD Vance keeps getting, you know, buttonholed by reporters and asked and said like, these are lies, right? You understand, that these are lies. The Wall Street Journal reported that the day before the debate, JD Vance talked to the city manager at Springfield, who told him that these weren't true.
Mm-hmm.
And JD Vance is saying, I don't care that it isn't true, because it's getting people to talk about what I want them to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And what he wants them to talk about are these other fanciful mythological threats that inferior people, unhumans, as the title of a book that he blurbed,
Wow.
positively, called them, that all of these people, from poorer countries, from the developing world, from places that the United States has colonized and roiled over the centuries, that they are coming here, and that will somehow destroy us or turn us into them. And that's not what they want. They don't want people in Springfield to come together with people from Haiti to look at the ways in which neoliberalism and corporate greed has directly impacted both of them in the same way. Sometimes
Yeah.
in the case of the same companies, right?
Yeah.
They don't want that. They don't want people to, and they definitely don't want people to look at the United States as being a place with a fluid and plural culture that's always changing and always reinventing itself, and always trying to perfect itself. They want a very static idea of of this is what America was, this is what it should be, and we should be on top of it. And
Yeah.
we personally, like JD Vance and Donald Trump, should be the leaders of it. That's what they want, and that's the point of these lies. And that's why the last thing I'll say about it is there's a lot of funny memes, and they're funny, but like this isn't funny.
Yeah.
And I think that people who are watching the debate and are laughing at Trump, and I understand the power of humor, and I understand that like laughing at a bully is a way to diffuse their power.
Yeah.
But be very careful, because if you're out there like doing TikToks or making jokes about people eating cats, like at some level you're just repeating the lie,
Yeah.
and you're
Yeah.
just giving it more oxygen, which is the
Yeah.
last thing it needs.
Absolutely. Yeah, that type of bigotry is definitely a useful tool for anyone who wants to distract when it comes to the real greed and the real problems that all working class and middle class Americans are suffering from, regardless of race, skin color, any of that.
Oh, that's
Jonathan, I really want to thank you for coming on here and just breaking down the origin of these rumors and giving us your knowledge of Haiti. And like I said, I really appreciate the work that you've done on social media, telling people the truth behind all of this and trying to use social media as a tool for good and a tool for actual journalism instead of a tool for just reinforcing rhetoric and misinformation and things like that. So I really
yeah.
appreciate you coming on the show.
My pleasure, my pleasure. I also
Thank
am
you.
not I also can't do the dance. I can dance. I'm a good dancer, but I can't do that.
Yeah, yeah, me either. So that's why I just do the satire thing on TikTok. Thanks again, Jonathan.
All right, thank you.